Hi, how are you all doing? As far as the peanut butter thing goes, look it up on Wikipedia. It was invented by a French Canadian and is marketed as if it is American. It is a conspiracy, and I am happy to give you 20 minutes on it at a later time of day. Yeah, lightning talk. I am Thursday Bram. I am the only thing between all of you and lunch. I have 30 minutes on the glory and greatness of style guides, and we're gonna go through it, and hopefully my stomach won't be too hungry, yours won't. We'll see how we do. So, first off, I really like style guides, like a lot. I make style guides for fun. I make style guides for my own personal projects, which only I will ever work on. And I also make style guides for wider use, including the Responsible Communication Style Guide, which is available as a prize for the badge contest. And in fact, there are no other print copies available right now, so whoever gets that, that's a hot commodity. My current style guide project is a style supplement for people writing about Python programming. So my current problem with all style guides is the question of disambiguation. So you will probably hear me yell about that sometime before this conference ends. I would also like to assume that I'm among fellow style guide enthusiasts here. Excellent, you are my people. Nobody likes this talk except, you know, documentarians. So, you're all at least familiar with the idea of a style guide, but we're gonna go over a couple of givens just to establish where we are for this talk. First, style guides are amazing. If you haven't had the joy of working with one, we're talking about a list of style decisions that your team is sticking to create a consistent voice in your writing. And you no longer have to remember all of those style decisions. They are written down. You can reference them. More brain space for better things. When you're working with a team, sharing a style guide helps ensure that everybody on the team works with the same style. Readers won't get confused by different spellings of words. Editors don't have to correct the same errors over and over and over again. And writers can eliminate internal debates about whether to capitalize the word internet. Style guides are, of course, not limited to just written content. There are design style guides, there are coding style guides, and sometimes there's some design styles in a writing style guide. So a little bit of every sort of creative process can find style guides accessible. And it's also possible to pick up a whole bookshelf of style guides. There are giant references like the Chicago Manual of Style, my true love. There's also industry-specific style guides, like the Blue Book, which covers legal documentation. There are organization-specific style guides, like the Microsoft Manual of Style for technical publications. And depending on the project you're working on, you may need more than one style guide. You might use an internal style guide when you're writing documentation, then need to, sorry, my notes are longer than this slide. Sometimes you'll need to pull something bigger for any issues that your internal guide doesn't cover. So maybe somebody really wants to argue with you about exactly how you use hyphen and dashes. That's probably more of a Chicago Manual of Style problem than your internal style guide. And it's kind of a somewhat graceful deprecation process. You keep the guidelines that you need close to hand with a fallback plan for anything that an internal guide doesn't cover. And so those internal style guides are mostly what we are going to be talking about here. We're not going to talk about reinventing like AP style from scratch. Not a good use of our time. Though, if any of you do want to, write your own style guide and publish it, I still have room on my style guide shelf. Making your own style guide is a relatively easy process, given that everybody here has at least a little experience with documentation. I want I wouldn't say it's an easy process for a novice, though. But it can be very simple. The Responsible Communication Style Guide started as a list of notes that I kept for my own writing. I shared it with a couple of people to use as a template for their projects, and that list just kept getting bigger as I had more questions. At some point, I was like, well, we should turn this into a book, because scrolling through 30 pages on a Google Doc is not getting me the information I need in a timely fashion. So you too have the power to create your own style guide deep inside of you. I have faith in each of your abilities to do so. So, given that we're all on board with the power and glory of creating style guides, let's get to the piece that we really need to talk about. What goes into developing a style guide and convincing people to use it? A lot of developing a style guide is exactly what you think it is. You make a list of what you want to cover, you check what other people in your team are having difficulties with, and you just keep adding items to the list when you hear a new suggestion or you make a novel mistake. And let me be perfectly honest, most of my style guides are lists of mistakes that I have made that I never want to make again. Like, even for my print style guides, for the Responsible Communication Style Guide, I already have 2 pages of things for the second edition because I have made entirely new mistakes since the book went to the printers. So as you're working on your style guide, you've got your list, you keep editing it, you ask some people to read it, you incorporate feedback, and at some point, you've got something that you're ready to share with a broader audience. That's your first edition, the thing that people are going to get to use for work. And I say first edition because style guides aren't carved in stone. Even Chicago Manual Style and AP Style have yearly new editions because language changes almost that fast. And I mean, it's not different from process documentation in that way. Anytime you finish a piece of documentation, I think that's when everybody else on the team starts thinking about what new features they can add and how they can make all that beautiful work obsolete immediately. So there's no secret sauce when it comes to creating style guides. You're making the tool that you need, so you make it in the way that works for you. There's no magic software that will automatically pluck words from your documentation and shove them into a style guide format. You're going to have to sit down and make the list yourself. But it doesn't have to be complicated, at least at first. You can get the job done in a text file if that's the only software available to you, though I'm hoping that everybody in this room has at least a few other options. And I would encourage you to learn from my mistake, and after about 5 pages, move your style guide out of a word processing tool. It doesn't work well after that. But a style guide can be a piece of your documentation. It can live where your documentation is. It can be a book on your desk. It's a question of your workflow and what makes sense for your workflow. So I could keep going on and on about the mechanics of putting a style guide together, but your documentation writers, you know how to put words in a list and figure out what to do with them. So I want to focus on the real major issues that come up with creating a style guide. And there are 3 key sticking points that I'm going to cover in this talk. We're going to talk about questioning assumptions. We're going to talk about bringing in unheard voices. We're going to talk about providing tooling and education. So I was originally going to go into a discussion about user research here, but Jen Lambern's talk yesterday covered everything I was going to cover and more and was better. So watch that talk, remember everything from there, and then bring that back and apply it to your style guide research. It does come down to talking to other people and listening to what they have to say. But along that process, you have to question your assumptions. Question the assumptions you make about the meanings of words that you're trying to define, how people use them, what comes to mind when they hear that word. Jargon, acronyms, idiom, and slang, they all have their place in writing, though not always in documentation writing, but they should only be there if they're improving our ability to communicate. If we're using jargon without thinking, it might not be doing the job that we're hoping it to. And that's kind of a side benefit to creating a style guide, especially if you're sharing it with other people. It gives you a chance to ask questions about all aspects of your workflow, about aspects of the organization you work for, and about the general status quo of the projects that you work on. If your documentation is all in advanced technical jargon, developing a style guide is the opportunity to go to every manager and every person on the team and say, so why do we need to be this technical? Is there a place for something less technical? Is there a place for something more technical? All of the process gives you a chance to have those discussions. And if there is a reason, great, write it down in the style guide, don't worry about it. If there isn't a reason, maybe consider what the changes you could make to improve that organizational communication are. So with a style guide, one of the reasons that it's a good chance to look at the status quo is because once you finish edition 1, you make your style guide, most people will not argue with it. They'll be like, oh, this is the policy. This is a good thing and a bad thing, depending on the situation, and I would never encourage you to use this situation for evil. But we can use it for good. It's an opportunity to advocate for changes that improve our organizations, that improve our projects, and that improve our documentation. And it can be little things. You get to choose things like whether or not internet is capitalized and whether email has a hyphen in it. But you also get to choose how members of your organization refer to people, what metaphors are considered inappropriate in these contexts, and even whether images must have alt text tags. Each of these decisions is an opportunity to create a more inclusive organization as much as a way to coordinate the voice of your organization. It's a way to make your documentation available to more people and make it useful for more people. And if it's in the book, a lot of people will just do what you told them to. And of course you should go through all the appropriate channels to get a new style guide approved before implementing it. Of course you should work with your team to make sure decisions are acceptable to as much of the organization as possible. You can adapt and update your style guide as appropriate for your organization. But there's that one dude bro in like every office who won't give you input during the process, but then wants to change everything when the style guide or whatever project is done. Yeah, for that person, your style guide is in fact chiseled in stone if they try to say, how do we update this? Whoops. And while I am perhaps advocating for ignoring certain people's needs if they aren't able to participate in the process, I do have to caution about moving too far in the opposite direction. While requiring writers to match an organization's voice and style makes absolute sense, style guides are definitely not meant as ways to police other people's tone or voice. There is no one true way to write. And we should only attempt in our style guides to describe how to use language within our own context. We are doing this work to empower writers to do better. It's never our job to tell people that they're writing incorrectly. It's our job to empower them and to help them move forward. Judging people on their ability to meet that perfect voice, it does have ramifications beyond whether your documentation is consistent. It can be a question of enforcing a particular way of writing or speaking, which is essentially classism. And at worst, controlling language and the way that we talk and the way that we write has been used as a tool of colonization and a tool of destruction. And honestly, if you're making sure that every single thing in your documentation and in your marketing materials match perfectly, there's no human element. It's bad writing because there's no connection to the humans involved. So, yeah, writing a style guide is more responsibility than it might look on the surface. Pulling together those lists of words and styles isn't nearly as hard as understanding the impact of a style choice. We have an obligation to take extra care when developing style guides, especially those intended to be used by a diverse audience. We need to balance the voice of the organization with the voice of the writer. We can clarify how we communicate without policing other people's writing in problematic ways. Sorry, water break. So I'm really excited by how empathy and compassion sort of feel like this year's theme for the conference, partially because empathy is the best tool that we have for building effective style guides. And I know you probably thought that there was like some great technical tool, but no, it's empathy. It's how we feel about people. We need compassion in this process. We need a lot of compassion in this process. We need compassion for our users, which for style guides are the people who will use the style guide to write documentation. But we also need empathy for our users, which I would like to start calling our grand users, but I don't know if that'll catch on. But we have to have empathy for both sets of users. We need empathy for everybody involved. And finding enough empathy, it can be a hard part of working on something like a style guide or a piece of documentation. I would like to think that most of us have compassion for fellow writers. At least we've done the similar work and had similar problems, whether those writers are full-time or whether they write on top of other responsibilities. But empathizing with your readers is a tougher problem, because we're not just making sure that we get the technical pieces right. We're making sure that we have an understanding of our readers that allows us to provide information that they will understand at the place that they are. So I'm not just talking about figuring out their technical know-how. I'm talking about the cultural context around the words we use and the words that we repurpose for technology. And I know that inclusivity in style guides can feel like a weird mix sometimes, but when you take a look at how certain names come about in technology and how certain people respond to them, it's a little bit more obvious. It's a little bit of a clearer connection. So, sorry. I'm going to use the example of the Chevy Nova. So, somebody here has already heard this example. According to urban sales legends, the Chevy Nova sold poorly in Latin American markets because Nova means doesn't go in Spanish. This is a really good story, and I wish it was true. Unfortunately, Snopes has disproved this story. But I'm still going to use it as an example here because most of the other examples I could talk about require content warnings. There are multiple cases where somebody didn't know a context for a word, used it in a way that made somebody else uncomfortable, and that became a larger problem very rapidly. So, we're all aware that listening is a key skill for documentation. We know we need to listen to as many people as possible, whether they create or consume or otherwise interact with the materials we're creating. But those aren't all the voices that we need to hear. We need to listen to programmers from much more dramatically different backgrounds. So it's easy to say, oh, you know, somebody who's gone through a computer science degree probably knows this information, I can write at this level. But what about people who are learning coding in different ways? I know half a dozen single parents who are learning to code and taking on technical jobs, but they have different time constraints than a 20-something guy fresh out of college who might not have that many demands on his time and can read 20-page tutorials for fun. I mean, they are fun, but not everybody wants to go through all 20 pages. So the only way to learn to listen to people who aren't in this room is to go out and talk to them. If we want a truly inclusive industry, we need to meet the needs of people who aren't in this room yet, who haven't been able to join us. We need to go out and find them. And you won't be able to ensure your style guide is all things to all people, especially in the first edition. But starting with the intent to listen and a practice of listening and a practice for iterating on the feedback as it comes in is the right place to start. As many people as possible can be in on building a style guide from your team. Not everybody will find it fun, some people won't give you feedback, but you can bring in editors, you can bring in beta testers, you can do research with users going through your style guide, you can bring in sensitivity readers. There's a lot of steps that you can handle internally to start to bring in people, and then you can build on that base to go wider, to go to code schools and talk to people there about how they're learning to code, or to go to meetups and understand that not everybody is at the same level in those meetups. It's a process that we have to build along the way as we develop those style guides. And this is kind of a pro tip for business practice as well. Inclusion during the development process gives other members of your organization a sense of ownership. It improves the likelihood that they'll use your style guide when it's complete. And it's kind of nice that in this case, doing the right thing makes our lives easier. So, we want people to use our style guides. What's the point of a style guide that no one uses? I feel like I should have a punchline there, but it's not actually a joke. There's not a lot of value in a style guide that nobody picks up. The best style